Weak Boy is the only one that can level up, so he becomes the strongest with all stats maxed out. Jinwo is an ugly, disgusting loser with nothing on his life. His father went to buy milk and his mother is in a coma. This leaves him a broke, useless guy who will do anything to feed his younger sister. 10 years ago, huge gates appeared all around the planet, releasing several monsters. Humanity had no chance to fight back as weapons didn't deal any damage. However, some humans awakened some powers and became known as hunters. Hunters are classified based on their magical power from E rank to S rank. And since they cannot level up or increase their rank, they can only be stronger by getting better gear. Until this day, humans still clear those gates called dungeons in order to get magic crystals which can be sold for profit. We then see Jinwo arrive to a dungeon site where everyone greets him. Upon noticing this, one of the hunters asks him if Jinwo is someone strong. Yet Kim replies that Jinwo is famous for being the weakest hunter of all mankind who once went to hospital while raiding the weakest dungeon. While walking, Jinwo hears Juhi's voice asking why he's covered in bandages. Jinwo explains her that he got hurt during his last raid, mostly because there wasn't a healer in the party. Juhi complains that's reckless, but Jinwo admits that it's his fault because he's weak. They're called as the raid is about to start and Song, an experienced hunter, promises to lead the party. As Jinwo is about to enter the gate, he pulls out his knife E rank. This is the only piece of equipment he can afford, but still, he will give his best today and enters the dungeon. Once inside, Jinwo manages to defeat a goblin and gets its crystal. Suddenly, Goblin attacks him, but he manages to block the attack. The goblin continues attacking, but he evades everything. He tries to attack, however. When he does, his garbage knife breaks, allowing the goblin to stab him. Another hunter comes to defeat the goblin and Juhi heals Jinwo. Minutes later, the group manages to defeat the dungeon boss, but Jinwo is being healed once again. He was the only person who got injured in this party. She wants to know why he's trying to be a hunter so bad despite being weak, but Jinwo just apologizes. The group is dividing the drops until someone notices another entrance nearby. Everyone is confused, but Song reveals that sometimes there is double dungeons. They decide to explore it despite being against the rules. In this situation, they should usually report to the Hunter Association, however, that will mean they will lose all drops. Since this is a D rank gate, they think it should be fine and decide to vote if they should try the second boss or not. The vote is a draw, with Juhi being one of the 6 who said no. The last vote is Jinwo's, the 13th party member. Jinwo knows that this dungeon is dangerous for him, but he needs the money. He wants to send his younger sister through college and must also pay his mother's treatment fees. Therefore, to protect his family, he votes yes. With that decision, the group moves forward to explore the dungeon. Juhi uses this time to complain about his desire for death and flirts with him, making him promise to take her out for dinner. The group then reaches a big door, which confuses everyone because there's no boss rooms with doors. They think this is strange, but since they're all greedy, they decide to step in. The torches all around the room start to light up. The group see several statues standing around the room, and Jinwo notices another one sitting on what it seems to be a throne. Jinwo thinks this one is the bigger one, but the group starts to mention how they feel like they're being watched. They then notice something strange. There are no monsters inside the room. Song then notices the floor and sees what it seems to be a magic circle. Kim calls Song out, mentioning there is a statue with something written. Everyone gets near the angel statue and notice the inscription. Song reads it out loud, mentioning those are the commandments of the Kartanen Temple. First, they must worship God. Second, praise the god. Third, believe in God. And those who don't obey should die. Juhi freaks out and calls Jinwo, mentioning the eyes of the giant statue moved and looked at them. Jinwo says she must be imagining. Suddenly, the door closes. Everyone freaks out, and someone tries to run to the doors to escape. He touches the door, and suddenly a statue moves and slices his head off. Everyone starts screaming, and Jinwo falls into despair, thinking the guy who just died is a lot stronger than him. He doesn't understand why this monster could be in a D-rank dungeon. Jinwo then looks at the bigger statue, paying attention to every detail until he sees its eyes moving to look at him. Jinwo starts having a flashback about the moments he faced life and death situations. Since he was broke and weak, he had to look for loopholes to survive. He had to observe everything in detail to get his chance. Upon returning to reality, Jinwo shouts at them to get down. The huge statue shoots a laser beam with its eyes, killing several hunters. Luckily, Jinwoo managed to save Juhi, but she's panicking in fear. He looks around confused about what happened and how they ended up like this. He knows they're trapped and cannot escape. Song approaches Jinwoo and asks how Jinwoo knew about it, but he replies that he just sensed danger. Jinwoo then notices that Song's arm is missing, but the old man says it's okay and asks him to stop the bleeding. Jinwoo warps bandages around Song's arm, who reveals that he's been into some B-rank raids, but knows that this place must be an S-rank dungeon. Song tells Jinwoo it's a bad idea to fight the statue, and they should find a way to escape. However, a brain-damaged guy refuses to die like this. He just signed a contract with a major guild and won't die here. The guy starts running forward, mentioning that he's confident that he's faster than the Flash, but the huge statue looks at him and destroys him. Everyone starts to panic, and Jinwoo wonders why the statue hasn't killed them yet. He then thinks about the commandments and thinks this dungeon has some special rules. He gets up and notices the statue preparing to attack. He suddenly kneels and notices the statue stopped the attack. He tells everyone to kneel to the statue, revealing that as long as their heads are below a certain height, the statue won't attack. In short, this is what the first commandment means. Everyone follows his movements, and the statue's eyes deactivate. They celebrate because the statue won't attack them, but Jinwoo knows this isn't over yet. Suddenly, the statue gets up and starts walking forward. Jinwoo mentions they need to follow the commandments, and now they must praise God. A random guy steps forward, claiming that he knows how to praise God and starts praying. However, Jinwoo realizes this guy is praying to the wrong god. The statue smiles and steps on him. Everyone panics and starts running, but the statue starts chasing everyone. One of the guys runs near a statue, but that statue moves and slices him in half. Jinwoo runs with Juhi and looks around. He notices there are some statues with some musical instruments and tells everyone to get near one of those statues. The statue starts playing the instrument, and they feel relieved because they have been spared. Jinwoo and Juhi manage to reach a statue, but it doesn't play. It can only play if there is only one person near it. He starts running away, looking for the next statue, but the huge one starts chasing him. It almost steps on him, but he manages to avoid it, rolling towards another one. This statue has a shield that also tries to kill him. Jinwoo manages to avoid fatal damage and crawls to the next statue. The huge statue is still walking behind him and prepares to step on him. Suddenly, the statue Jinwoo was crawling to started singing. The huge statue sits down on its throne, and Juhi checks on Jinwoo, but upon looking down, notices that he lost his foot. She tries to heal him with all her power, but ends up using so much of her power, and she starts coughing blood. The group starts to blame Song for this situation. Song apologizes for forcing them into a decision and decides to bear all responsibility. Suddenly, an altar is raised in the middle of the room. Everyone is confused, but Jinwoo says that's the final commandment, to believe in God. One of the members who voted yes grabs his sword and points at Song, mentioning they need a sacrifice. Since Song claimed that he would take responsibility, he decides to accept his fate and walks toward the altar. Suddenly, a flame appears. Jinwoo is confused and asks if they can take him to the altar so that he can check it. When the three reach near the altar, 3 more flames appear. Jinwoo thinks that if they fail here, this huge statue will run wild into their world. Meanwhile, Jinna goes to the hospital to visit her mother like she does every day. She talks about her day and future plans. Back inside the dungeon, Jinwoo tells Juhi and the rest to come to the altar. More flames appear, and a new ring of blue flames appears around it. The dungeon door suddenly opens up, and one of the blue flames disappears. The statues start to move forward, making everyone freak out. Jinwoo looks around and notices the statues won't move if they look at them. Everyone follows his instructions, and the statues stop moving. However, some members start running away from the circle. One of the normal flames extinguished, but she managed to leave the room. The door, however, is starting to close. Jinwoo thinks this is a trap because the last commandment is to believe in God. The door is just to test everyone's faith in the statue. However, another guy throws Jinwoo aside before running toward the door. More people think about leaving, but Jinwoo explains that if the blue flames are extinguished, everyone will be able to escape. Suddenly, a guy thanks Jinwoo for allowing them to survive, but he starts to cry and apologizes before running away. Jinwoo starts crying, asking why they betrayed him. Song orders Juhi and Jinwoo to escape while he stays behind. However, Juhi's legs give up, while Jinwoo angrily shouts that he has no foot, so he cannot help her. She starts complaining, but Song knocks her out because they're running out of time. Song then carries Juhi outside the door. Jinwo notices a sword on the ground and picks it up, promising that he will take one of the statues to be his best buddy in hell. The statues attack him, making him lose one arm, followed by several other attacks. He shouts in pain, mentioning that he also wanted to become stronger, but he can't. After several attacks, he's barely alive, but refuses to give up. The statues stab his shoulder, and he remembers those who just betrayed him, trying to justify it by mentioning their family. This is all selfishness because he also has a family that he wants to return to and take care of. In the end, the statue throws him into the altar while preparing for the last attack. He cries as the statue is about to slice him, and the last blue flame goes out. A system message appears asking if he wants to become a player. He says yes. Another screen appears congratulating Jinwo for becoming a player. Suddenly, he wakes up in the hospital in shock. He notices that he still has his arm and pulls the blanket to check if he has his leg. After confirming, he thinks that he was stabbed through the chest, but there's no mark. He thinks this was all a dream until someone knocks on the door. The guy is impressed that Jinwo is awake and introduces himself Wu Jinchul, a manager of the Hunters Association surveillance team. Jinwo wonders what they want from him, but Jinchul first asks his partner to get the doctor here. That's when Jinwo finds out he was unconscious for the past 3 days. He asks about Juhi and Song, but the guy confirms they're fine despite Song losing his arm. As a result, he will be forced to retire as a hunter. Juhi, on the other hand, is still traumatized and getting psychiatric care. In her case, she won't probably continue working as a hunter. Jinwo thinks about everything that happened, and Jinchul mentions that only 6 people survived that dungeon. He says that working as a hunter is dangerous, but it's still rare to see this type of outcome. However, he mentions that something was strange. The White Tiger Guild came to the dungeon after being alerted by the guys who ran away. However, they never saw a second room. All they saw was Jinwo collapsed on the ground. They investigated, but found no evidence of the so-called temple or statues that everyone described. Jinwo and Jinchul think that's unbelievable. However, every survivor said the same thing, and they found the bodies of the ones who died. Therefore, the Hunter Association cannot suspect the rest of the group for PKing everyone. Jinchul, however, reveals they suspect Jinwo of experiencing a second awakening. Jinwo is shocked to hear those words and remembers all he was taught. A hunter's power is determined when they awaken their power and never changes. However, there are some rare cases where a hunter goes through a second awakening. Some of them rose from low ranks to a or even his rank. Jinwo tries to hide his excitement about this possibility. They then pull out a gadget to measure his power and tell him to put his hand over it. Jinwo smiles, thinking this is his lucky day, and puts his hand. Jinchul, however, is thinking that it was impossible for Jinwo to survive that type of described dungeon because he's weak. And since there isn't any evidence of the monsters, he thinks Jinwo became either rank A or S. However, his score is a big fat 10. Jinwo is excited to hear the result and what rank he will get now. Jinchul, however, apologizes for the mistake because Jinwo is still worse than trash. They leave, and Jinchul's assistant mentions that every other E-rank hunter managed to get 70 or higher. While walking, Jinchul thinks they cannot explore that dungeon because it disappeared. But he still doesn't understand how Jinwo survived. Meanwhile, Jinwo is in his room thinking sorry for himself. Yet, he's confused because they never asked him about the screen in front of him. The screen shows that he has unread messages, and he thinks that he's the only one who can see it. He clicks on the screen, but it doesn't react. He suddenly remembers that when he was about to die, the screen showed that he completed the secret quest, Courage of the Weak. Suddenly, Jinna enters into the room and starts berating him. She tells him to take care of himself because that makes her worried. He apologizes and she complains, mentioning that he always ends up in the hospital while the others are fine. He looks at her and cannot believe he was prepared to leave her behind. He smiles at her, but she complains again. If this happens again, she will quit school and get a job so that he can quit being a hunter. He apologizes again and asks if she can see the Windows screen. She's confused and asks what he is talking about. He apologizes and asks her about games. He wants to know how he can read unread messages, but she thinks he's crazy and should get another medical checkup. He replies that she used to play tons of games, and she gives up, replying that he would be able to read it by opening his message box. He repeats those words, and the messages open. He notices that he has a daily quest called Strength Training has arrived. He thinks for a bit and remembers the word player was mentioned before. Jinna, in the end, gives up and leaves. Meanwhile, Jinwo starts reading everything about this system. In short, it was made to help him develop. However, if he fails to follow the system, he will get a penalty. He then sees a screen mentioning the rewards have arrived and gets confused. He then accepts the daily quest and notices that he will become bald like Saitama. He must do 100 push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and then run 10 kilometers. If he doesn't complete them, he will be punished. Jinwo laughs, mentioning he's in the hospital, therefore that's impossible to do, and takes a nap. Meanwhile, Jinchul is in the car telling his boss on a call that Jinwo is still trash. The boss is at least happy. The monsters didn't leave the dungeon and started to roam on the streets. However, this is still pretty much confusing. Jinchul confirms this is weird, and they decide to mark this case as something special that will be revised on the future. Meanwhile, in another guild building, the guild leader tells his strongest member, Cha, to participate in a B-rank dungeon as instructor. She is confused because she's S rank, but he explains that raid will be a test and practical training for their new recruits, yet she still doubts her ability as a mentor. The leader replies she just needs to beat the monsters as usual, and everyone will learn from watching. She hesitates, but the guy mentions their guild is on the top 5 of the country, but they're unseen in the international level. He knows their ranks cannot improve, but their teamwork can. Hours later, a gate suddenly appears in the middle of the road. The military takes care of the whole situation, while everyone wonders when the hunters are going to show up. Back in the hospital, Jinwo is still sleeping. The daily quest timer runs down and warns that he failed. Suddenly, the ground starts shaking and Jinwo wakes up. He ends up falling from his bed, but when he opens his eyes, he sees himself in the middle of the desert. He's confused about what's happening and thinks this is just a dream. However, there's a giant desert centipede looking at him. The system Windows then shows up and tells him to survive for the next 4 hours. Jinwo is shocked and starts running. Meanwhile, the nurses check his room and notice that it's empty. Jinwo is doing his best to run and scream from this huge centipede, but more appear. He's been running for 2 hours already. The nurses are looking for him, but they never find him. Luckily, Jinwo manages to run for the whole 4 hours and returns to his room. The system alerts that he completed his penalty quest, but he collapses before checking the rewards. The nurses then enter his room again and get shocked to see him. The next day, Jinwo finally gives up being a lazy loser and gets up from bed. He tells his sister on the phone that he will be released soon. After hanging the call, he gets up and starts doing his quest. Days later, Juhi receives a call inviting her to join a D-rank dungeon. She thinks about rejecting it and apologizes. The guy on the phone then mentions Jinwo already awoke, and she decides to visit him. At the hospital, she hears the nurses complaining about Jinwo running and exercising. They complain that hunters are supposed to heal faster than normal people, but they think he's crazy for doing this. Juhi looks outside the window and sees Jinwo running. He takes a small break and talks about this situation. It's been 4 days since the Windows system appeared. Every time he completes the quest, he gets 3 types of rewards. He accepts full recovery and returns back to normal as if he never exercised. The other reward is 3 points that he can distribute to any ability he wants. He adds them to his strength and starts to feel stronger. He then talks about having skill and inventory screens, however, he still thinks this is quite strange. He thinks this is just like a game, but everyone around thinks he's crazy. Upon returning to his room, Jinwo decides to open his final reward, the random loot box. This time, he got a key. He's confused because he always got stuff like pens or bandages. Upon checking the information, the system reveals he can use it to enter an instance dungeon in a specific location. He's confused with this, but thinks this is some sort of event that will help him get stronger. Meanwhile, nobody has raided the dungeon that appeared in the middle of the road. The news reveal in which locations new gates appeared, therefore everyone should expect traffic delays. Jinwo uses this time to visit his mother in the other hospital. 4 years ago, she suddenly collapsed in front of him. Turns out that she now suffers from the eternal sleep disease. This is a new disease that appeared when the dungeon gates appeared in the world, and it only affects one in every several 10,000 people. But in short, this only happens when the person is exposed to mana for several times, and there's no cure. Jinwo returns to his room to do push-ups while remembering when he tried to have a normal job. He was slow, weak, when suddenly it became easier. Turns out, he just awakened as a hunter. He thought this was his lucky day, as he could go into the dungeons and be able to pay for his mother's life support. His sister thought it was dangerous, but he told her to trust him. But in the end, even the weakest goblins were able to beat him. Everyone had to save him and complain about his skills. They even expressed that if didn't help the raid, his cut would be reduced. However, Jinwoo simply smiled and apologized. But now, if he puts all his ability points into strength, he will be able to become strong. He decides to check the instance dungeon key and goes to a station. He feels confident about his gear and ability to run if he needs to. He then pulls out the key and suddenly a key lock appears. He inserts it and a dungeon appears out of nowhere. He enters that portal and sees the system alert. Suddenly, the dungeon exit gets blocked. Jinwoo then sees normal people leaving the station and realizes this is a separate dimension. He thinks this kind of dungeon is something like a red gate. He thinks this is a mess because he cannot run away, but the system explains that he can only leave by defeating the boss or using a teleportation stone. He's confused, but he knows he must beat this dungeon. He still doubts himself. After all, he couldn't defeat the weakest monsters. How would he be able to solo raid this dungeon? He looks at his knife and knows he has no choice. He walks down the stairs and scouts the dungeon. Suddenly, 3 goblins appear in front of him. He's scared and remembers the last time he met a goblin, he was stabbed. The monsters attack, but he manages to dodge and parry. He's still a total noob when it comes to fighting and almost gets deleted. He manages to roll like a god doggo and avoid the next incoming strike. He then rushes forward and stabs the goblin. The other 2 try to attack him from behind, but he dodges and follows up by killing the 2. He realizes that he became stronger, yet a wolf appears behind him. The wolf dashes at him, and he tries to block. However, his cheap butter knife breaks again. He notices the wolf has a meal jaw and knows this is way stronger than the goblins. He wants to run, but his legs are shaking. He starts to freak out and thinks that he became traumatized by the last dungeon. The wolf runs at him and manages to scratch his face. Jinwoo realizes that he has no healer. If he dies here, he's dead. The wolf then starts running again and lunges at him. The lichen pounces on Jinwoo, but he dodges away with some impressive acrobatics. He notices his body now feels much lighter than usual. He lands on his feet easily, and he decides to overcome his fear and not give up his chance at a second life. He rushes at the lichen and lands a super punch that sends it flying. Jinwoo notices his lands steaming from the punch. He wonders if it is a result of his increase in strength. The lichen gets back to his feet, and Jinwoo realizes it's still much stronger than him. The lichen charges at him again, and Jinwoo counters with his punches, but this time they are not effective. He has no choice but to dodge out of the way to avoid the lichen attack. Jinwoo realizes that he would need some help to defeat the lichen. Since he has no party with him, he decides to make use of the resources at his disposal. He makes a run for it, but the lichen claws at his shin. He jumps to create space between them, but he knows he can't keep this up. He wishes he had some kind of magical weapon to use against the lichen. Then he remembers his secret inventory. He opens it up and draws out a magic sword, and as the lichen lunges at him again, he slices it cleanly into 2. A notification screen comes up telling him he has defeated the lichen and leveled up. Jinwoo wonders how the sword got into his inventory because it cost a lot of money, which he knows he can't afford, but he decides not to worry about that. His wounds heal up, and he realizes his body doesn't hurt anymore. 2 more steel-fanged lichens show up, but Jinwoo isn't bothered because he now has a weapon to defeat them. He tries to lift up the sword from where it was plunged into the ground, but he can't. Jinwoo starts to panic as the lichens get even closer. He desperately begs the sword to come out of the ground, and he pulls it one more time to dislodge it. The lichens are already lunging at him, but he swings the sword on time to take out one. He swings at the other ones, but it catches it with its still fangs. Jinwoo doesn't want the lichen to damage his sword after that it took him to get it. He kicks the side of the lichen to make it lose its grip, and he defeats the lichen. Another lichen appears out of nowhere, and Jinwoo isn't a bit bothered, because these lichens are nothing compared to the monsters he faced in the secret room. Jinwoo faces the lichen, but it turns and runs away with its tail between its legs. Jinwoo decides to rest against the wall. He realizes he's now level 2 after getting into actual combat. He never leveled up when he was doing daily quests. His wounds heal up, and he notices his stats have all increased by 1 point, making a total of 5 points. Performing daily quests only gave him 3 points. He wonders how much his strength will increase with each point added to his stats. He doesn't know how his stats of intelligence and perception were quantified, but he knows how much his strength increases with each point added. He speculates that he'll be able to get more points the higher his basic ability of that stat is. He realizes he can actually get stronger, but he doesn't want to get carried away from defeating 5 small monsters. He gets up to check for magic gems on the bodies of the Lycans. A notification comes up telling him he got an item instead of a magic gem, and he takes out the item, which is a wolf fang. Jinwoo wonders if the beast he encounters in this dungeon will differ from the Ni in reality, since it all seems to be controlled by a game system. The shop screen comes up and Jinwoo tries to buy something, but the game system tells him new players can't buy anything. He decides to sell the fang, and he gets 20 gold coins in return. He wonders what the equivalent would be in cash. He knows it can't be worth much because he's in an E-rank dungeon. He picks up his sword wondering what to do. He has to defeat the dungeon boss or get the teleportation stone to get out, but he doesn't know where either are. He doesn't feel confident he can defeat the dungeon boss alone, but he thinks he stands a chance if he continues to level up. He suddenly looks up to see an entire pack of the Lycans lurking in the shadows. The Lycan that ran away went back to call the rest of the family, but Jinwoo isn't scared anymore. They charge at him, but he charges at them all in defiance as well. He slashes and slices them as they dive him. One Lycan gets on his back, but he shrugs it off. He's now surrounded by Lycans, and he hopes to enjoy the battle, hoping the Lycans don't die too easily. His past flashes before his eyes, and a smile crosses his face. He engages all the Lycans, happy to battle as long as he gets to level up. He levels up as he cuts them down, and he finally defeats them all, earning the title of Wolf Assassin. Jinwoo is sweating from exhaustion, and he realizes his sword is almost broken. He realizes that his weapons are expendable, and they'll eventually wear off, but he's glad the battle is over. He looks over his inventory to look at the items he got from the battle and what remains from his previous inventory. He gets the teleportation stone for completing the battle. He thought it would be much harder to get, and he contemplates leaving the dungeon, but he doesn't know if he'll get another chance to become stronger so easily. He wonders if the dungeon will disappear like a time-limited event in a game if he leaves. He tells like he's being toyed with by a supreme entity, and he has no way of escape. He decides to store the stone in his inventory and continue deeper into the dungeon. Juhee gets a call from the Hunter Association, and she apologizes for her earlier actions. They tell her a dungeon close by had a break, and they need her help because they are short of healers. As Jinwoo goes deeper into the dungeon, he defeats several new beasts, and he levels up as he does, so making it easier to defeat each new beast. He takes a while to catch his breath. Through his battles, he noticed that the color of the names of the creatures shows that he's weaker, on the same level or stronger than them. When he faced the first Lycan, its name was red, but the names of Lycan appearing are now colored white. Jinwoo arrives at a flight of stairs, and he perceives that he can't defeat the monster awaiting at the end of it. He looks at his stats, and he notices his level hasn't increased for a while now. His sword is also on the verge of breaking into bits, but he decides to go down the stairs. He gets to the end of it, and he realizes the place doesn't look like a train station anymore. He hears a rushing sound, and he turns to face it. He sees the monster coming to him at full speed, but he can't react fast enough. The monster knocks him back into the wall, and his sword breaks. The area boss, which is a water snake, reveals itself, and Jinwoo looks at the color of its names and realizes they are the same level. He looks at the scales of the snake, and he realizes his sword would be useless against it, but going bare-handed would be even worse. The snake strikes at him, but he uses his sword to deflect the snake's attack. Since the snake attacks so fast and fiercely, he decides to weaken it first, but his sword can barely do anything against the snake's scales. The snake returns for another attack, but Jinwoo dodges out of the way, but he enters the range of the snake's tail. The snake smacks him with its tail, and it sends him flying into the water. The snake goes for him underwater, but he quickly swims out to safety. The snake doesn't give him time to breathe as it attacks him once he's out of the water, sending him flying a great distance. As he gets back on his feet, he sees a train flying towards him, and he has to run out of the way. He thought he was much stronger, but now that he's against the snake, he feels so powerless. He grabs hold of his broken sword, wondering how much stronger he must become to stop being ridiculed constantly. He recalls when Gun-hee told him everyone was calling him the weakest hunter ever known to mankind. Gun-hee told him to work hard and make them change their mind. The snake attacks Jinwoo, sending him flying. Jinwoo tries to regain his balance, but the snake doesn't give him a chance to look cool. It pins him against the wall with its body and crushes him till the wall breaks. Jin Woo knows he was called that nickname because he was weak and helpless. He also knows that someone with overwhelming power will remain defeated, and the weak can do nothing but stand still when faced with the strong. People are looked down on if they are weak, even if they are considerably smart. Jin Woo doesn't want to be gentle anymore, he wants to become strong, and that's why he went into the dungeon. He jumps up like a possessed maniac and grabs the snake. He tries to crawl up its body, but the snake knocks him off. Jin Woo gets back in his feet. He vows not to give up till he gets stronger, and a blue aura engulfs him. His hair begins to stand on end, and the snake attacks, but he blocks it again, wearing out the snake's scale. He feels like he's not giving enough, and he tries to put in more effort. Compared to when he was face to face against God, the snake was nothing. The snake attacks again, and Jin Woo jumps into the air, and he plunges his sword into a chink on the snake's scale. The snake tries to attack him again, but he blocks it and slices the snake's side to wear out the scales more. He jumps into the air, and the snake uses that opportunity to open up its mouth and swallow Jin Woo. Jin Woo's sword flies into the air, but the snake looks down to see him holding on to it. Jin Woo uses his strength to crush the snake's scale, and the snake is hurt. It bobs and weaves, trying to knock Jin Woo off, but Jin Woo holds on tight. He continues pressing down on the snake's neck with all his power, and he eventually defeats it. He levels up after the battle, and a smile crosses his face. He realizes he did get stronger after all, and he picks up the item he got as a reward for winning. It was a dagger which is twice as strong as his previous sword, and it comes with paralysis and bleeding effects. He also gets a vial of the snake's venom, and he thinks its effects are overpowered. He gets a notification that the dungeon will be reset since he has defeated the boss, and the station returns to its normal state. Jin Woo walks out, but he can't see a person in sight. He wonders what the time is. A soldier approaches him asking why he's around the station, and if he didn't hear the announcement. He sees Jin Woo's sword and realizes he's a hunter. He apologizes to him and tells him he'll take him to the site. Jin Woo follows the man, wondering what happened. The soldier briefs him about the dungeon break, and he asks if monsters came out. The soldier tells him most of the monsters have been defeated, save for a giant magic beast. Jin Woo would feel the monster from that distance, and he knew that was the boss of the dungeon. The huge magic golem engages the hunters as the police tried to keep citizens behind the barricade. The hunters are giving their all to bring down the golem, but their attacks aren't strong enough to weaken it because it has a high defense. Jin Woo arrives at the site, and he realizes the hunters present don't have a great deal of teamwork. He can also see that most of the hunters are low ranks, and the battle was only prolonged because they had a tank whose rank was a bit high. He looks at the healers and notices there are 2 in D rank and 1 in B rank. The B rank healer is Ju Hee, but she isn't helping because she's dazed. A fellow healer riles her up to get her to help, but she still hasn't gotten over her encounter with God. She tries to make a healing circle, but she loses concentration and it breaks. Jin Woo notices this, and he sympathizes with her, but he isn't scared anymore. They were facing a D-rank monster, which is lower than the one he just faced. He pulls up his sleeves, getting ready to jump into action. The hunters can hardly hold on for much longer, and they pray for a higher rank hunter to arrive. Jin Woo knows he can defeat the monster as long as he can break its defense. He decides to get it with his most powerful hit. He throws his sword with insane force to break the golem's defense. The hunters use that opportunity to defeat the golem. The tank wonders how they were suddenly able to defeat the golem when their attacks weren't effective a second ago. He looks at Jin Woo's sword, wondering how the golem was defeated by it when the combination of their attacks did nothing. He asks the soldier who brought Jin Woo to the site who threw the sword, and he tries to show the tank, but Jin Woo is gone. The tank is terrified of Jin Woo's power, and he wonders if Jin Woo is a high-rank hunter. Jin Woo looks much stronger now, but he didn't think he would break the monster defense with just 1 hit. He thinks its vitality was already low before he hit it. As he walks away, Ju Hee notices him. The nurses in Jin Woo's hospital gossip about how good his body now looks and how cute he is. Jin Woo is doing his morning workout routine in his hospital room. The nurses wonder when he became so buff that they're always surprised when he takes his clothes off. When he first came to the hospital, he wasn't this buff, but they've noticed his shape has improved considerably since he started working out. They wonder if it's humanly possible to gain muscles as fast as Jin Woo did. One of the nurses knocks and enters Jin Woo's room, but she's surprised to see him with his shirt off. He apologizes for having his shirt off, and she apologizes for walking in on him. He goes to put on his shirt, but the nurse can't help but admire the firmness of his muscles. She wonders if he always had such a good physique, but Jin-woo asks her what she wanted to say to him. She snaps back into reality, and she tells him it's his day of discharge. She asks him if he still has any discomfort, and he tells her he's fully recovered. She tells him to complete his discharge procedures at the counter when he's ready, and Jin-woo thanks her for taking care of him. On a morning news show, the newscaster introduces Yuno. He is one of the 7th rank hunters with an impressive resume. She asks him what his life is like away from his missions, and he tells her he spends it training because daily training is indispensable. He tells her he would get rusty if he didn't simulate actual combat. She asks him if it isn't tiring, and he tells her that he's used to since he previously worked as a firefighter. Back then, he knew that a small mistake could endanger the lives of his colleagues. Jinna is watching the news when she suddenly realizes she's late. She rushes out of the room and calls out to Jinwoo. He tells her to be careful on her way to school. Jin-woo is rubbing his belly, and Jinna can't help but notice his abs under his shirt. She asks him if he's been working out, and he tells her just a little. She notices the height difference between them. She asks him if the increase in height is also a result of his training. She goes to put on her school shoes before heading out, but Jin-woo comes to hand her an umbrella she forgot. He gives her a friendly shove towards the door, and she tells him goodbye. After she leaves, Jin-woo goes into the living room, and he looks at his daily tasks. He's completed the other except running, and he decides to do that later. He looks at his stats, and he sees that he has unallocated points left. He knows he needs enough strength to deal damage, but it would be worthless if he can't hit his target. He sees the importance of the vitality and perception stats as well. He decides to distribute his points between strength, agility, and perception. He gets a call from his landlord and asks if his rent is due. The landlord tells him he's yet to pay rent for that month. Jin-woo tells him he'll transfer the money, and the landlord appreciates his response. He tells Jin-woo to take care of himself, and they end the call. Jin-woo still isn't sure if he underwent a second awakening, but he can now kill goblins in an instant, so he should be able to earn enough to make a living. He sits on the couch and scrolls through open dungeons he can clear. He knows he has to get a high-level dungeon to get anything meaningful, but he won't be qualified because of his low rank. He contemplates a reevaluation which will give him a higher rank and put him under the spotlight. With the increased attention, he would be able to make more money. But he knows people with a second reawakening are rare, and hunters whose stats increase with a level increase are non-existent. He knows how annoying the media can be and decides to drop the idea. He decides to keep his powers a secret till he understands it better. He gets a notification on his phone, and he's surprised. He immediately puts on his clothes and goes out to a location. He completes his daily task in the process, and he's about to accept his reward when a man calls out to him. The man introduces himself as Gong-suk, and Jin-woo introduces himself to the man. The man figures out that he's an E-rank adventurer, and one of his party members recognizes Jin-woo. He tells the man Jin-woo is famous for being the weakest hunter. Another of his members begins to laugh at Jin-woo's nickname, but Gong-suk tells them to cut it out. He apologizes for their behavior, and he asks the man if he can join them to raid the dungeon. Gong-suk tells him he can tag along to make up for the numbers. He tells him the requirements to enter the dungeon, and he tells Jin-woo he won't get any spoils, but they'll pay him a commission. He looks at them, and he sees there are 4 C rank hunters and 2 hunters who are D rank or lower. Jin-woo asks the man what he will be doing, and the man tells him he will carry their luggage containing their stuff. Jin-woo asks the man if he didn't bring a healer. The man tells him it's difficult for a private team like his to recruit a healer, but they have always managed like that. Though Jin-woo's concerned, the man hands him the contract. He reads through and sees that the party won't be liable for any injuries he incurs. He signs it, and another hunter comes to introduce himself as Jinho. He tells Jin-woo he is a D-rank hunter who was brought in to make up the numbers. Jin-woo is impressed with his gear, and he thinks Jinho is from a rich family. Jinho asks Jin-woo if the bags are too heavy, but he tells him he's right. He tells Jin-woo he doesn't have to speak so formally. They arrive at the gate, but because of how huge it is, they are skeptical it's actually a C-rank gate. Gong-suk tells them the dungeon was given a C rank by investigators. Jinho wonders if it's okay to enter the huge gate, and Jin-woo tells him only the magic flux matters. He tells him the association measures the flux and ranks the gate. Gates that are B rank and above are handled by large guilds, and those below C rank aren't very dangerous. Jinho is amazed by how much Jin Woo knows, and Jin Woo tells him he has been a hunter for a long time. He confesses that it's his first time entering a C-rank dungeon, and Gong-suk tells his party to follow him. They get ready and enter the gate. The dungeon is dark, so Gong-suk tells one of his members to cast a light. He's surprised that there's no monster in sight and no light in the dungeon. There are usually luminescent stones in a dungeon. Jin Woo remembers another dungeon he visited that was also pitch black. Jinho asks Jin Woo what luminescent stones are, and he tells him they are glowing rocks common to cave-like dungeons. He tells him they are found on the floor or roof of caves, and they emanate light. Jinho is confused by the loads of gems and stones associated with dungeons. Jin Woo tells him he will get used to it. They got deeper into the cave, and Jinho was still surprised there was still nothing in sight. He asks Jin Woo if there can be a dungeon without monsters, and Jin Woo tells him to keep quiet. Jin Woo listens hard, and he can hear monsters around, but they choose to remain hidden. Dong-suk tells his party to get ready for a battle. Jin Woo is surprised that all the monsters are moving together and rushing towards any light source. He tells them it's an insect-type magic beast, and the party members aren't pleased to go against insects. They look at the different holes, trying to predict where the insects will attack from. They all get uneasy as the sounds of the insects get closer. Jin Woo listens for the insects, and he perceives them in a hole above the party. One of them opens up the hole, and Dong-suk tells them he'll attract the insects while the others attack them from behind. Jinho tells Jin Woo to stay by his side, so he's protected. Dong-suk uses his taunt skill to attract all the insects to himself, and the other members attack the insects. Jinho wants to get into the action, but they tell him to stay back. One of the members uses his strongest attack to take down a lot of the insects, and the party pushes forward. Jin Woo is impressed with their teamwork, but he feels frustrated. They defeat all the insects, and Dong-suk asks Jin Woo how he predicted where the insects would come from. Jin Woo tells him it was his intuition. One of the party members calls out to Dong-suk, and they notice the insects were killed by something that bit them, and not their swords or magic. They figure out that there could be a monster who preys on the insects. Jin Woo tells Jinho to be cautious because his gear is so expensive. At the association gym, some hunters are working out when they hear a huge explosion. Some are surprised, but one hunter tells them it happens when their guild master is working out. They are impressed with his skills, but Yunho doesn't feel like it's enough for a warm-up. Jin Woo tells Jinho more about dungeons, and he asks Jin Woo if he can manage the luggage in such a huge dungeon. Jin Woo tells him he's fine earning more without fighting, but he's suspicious because the deal is too good to be true. He's still uneasy that the group doesn't have a healer, and they had to make up monsters. They find more half-dead insects, and they're even more suspicious. They think the dungeon boss is around the corner. They're about to move ahead, and Dong-suk asks his party member to light up the cave. They move forward, cutting through cobwebs, thinking the boss room is ahead. They find a lot of mana crystals that could make them millionaires. Everyone is fantasizing about what they'll use their newfound wealth to do. Jinho looks at Jin Woo's contract, and he tells Dong-suk Jin Woo should get some crystals since they aren't considered spoils. He tells Jinho Jin Woo will get his share as soon as they defeat the boss. They have to move the crystals before defeating the boss because the gate to the dungeon will close. They decide to use the opportunity since the boss is sleeping. Dong-suk asks his member for his tools, but he tells Dong-suk he left them back at their car. Dong-suk tells Jinho and Jin Woo to stay back while they get the tools to move the crystals. Jinho isn't comfortable with it, but Dong-suk assures him they are safe because the boss is asleep. Though C-rank dungeons require 8 people to clear them, Jin Woo remembers Dong-suk said they've always cleared dungeons with 6 members. He wonders why there aren't regulars to fill up the number deficit. As they walk out of the room, Dong-suk tells one of his members to seal off the room. They seal off the room, and Jinho realizes they've been betrayed. Jin Woo remembers when Gung-hee told him about people who do such things and get away with it easily because there's no surveillance in the dungeons. Jinho tried to break through the wall, but it was too strong. The dungeon boss awakens and approaches them. Jin Woo almost feels powerless, then he remembers his encounter with God, and he gains confidence. He tells Jinho to step back because he will defeat the monster. He brings out his sword from his inventory and walks forward to face the boss.